system for your wedding, birthday or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448 or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, doublets and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way.
Dyslexic, the silent different. Sandra here from the UK, the community person working for A1 Tribe. The book was written to support people that have a very low understanding of dyslexia. If you're struggling and not understanding why your literacy skills are poor and what steps you can take to get people to help you and to improve for yourself, handle the emotional sides of not being able to read well, it's worth getting hold of the book, and maybe some of the information in it can support you. It's available now on amazon.co.uk or amazon.com. Check it out. It's called Dyslexic, the Silent Different. Peace and love. Sandra. Sign.
Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life chat like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're a World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
Skunkworks Digital, a digital marketing agency that designs high-quality websites and email marketing campaigns. Need help? We can update and maintain your current website. Your website is an extension of your business. From large to small, we're here to help. Contact us on www.skunkworks.dev. Skunkworks Digital, the new breed of agency for the digital era.
Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison. Prison.
Already did my time, paid for my crime.
I want to say a big shout out going out to Lorraine Thompson. Welcome back.
Time.
I know you've been moving right across the state. Great to have you back on Issues Today. How we doing, Jennifer Boas Olin?
Already did my time.
Been some time since we've connected. Want to welcome you to Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio, where we have another explosive interview taking place. Discussion alongside my round team, my round table team,
and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen.
Supported exclusively by Yolanda McNair today.
Statewide.
And our head speaker will be Stephanie Babb. Please have our thoughts and prayers
very quick on
ready and in place for Teresa Gallagher, our TJ. That's my assistant producer, who has been ill for some time.
Game has been rearranged
and continues having surgery just this week past.
Being no gangster.
Making great recovery. And we're looking forward to having her back with us very soon.
With this living hell already.
But in the meantime, Yolanda McNair steps right in on the helm.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Got a few things that we want to talk about just before we head into today's main story.
My crime. Already did my time.
No win.
Crime.
No gain. No victory. That's the headline for
I was a drug dealer.
The Captain Brian Babb story.
But I never got
which we're going to be sharing with Stephanie Babb in just a few short moments.
To you and you, I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit.
Please use this opportunity
sit back and think it over
to share this live stream to every group that you have or connected to.
Brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters. Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time, already did my time.
Big shout out to Stephanie Harris Woodcock. We see ya.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing.
Feel free to send your comments across. We are live on www.worldjamglobalradio.com. We are live on Facebook. We are live on Twitter. We are live on most social media platforms.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Trying to cope with this living hell.
We look forward to your interaction and participation
Already did.
as we unravel
I paid for my crime.
the Captain Brian Babb story this afternoon, this evening, this morning, whatever your time zone is.
Hallowed it be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory.
Don't forget to tell a friend to tell a friend to tell another friend. My name is Kervin Julian. This is Issues Today. We are live on World Jam Global Radio, coming out from the UK, going out internationally, right across the world on the internet, on every social media platform.
Kill and stop them. It ain't about nothing.
The home for victims of police brutality, unlawful killing, wrongful convictions.
Stone. I'm trying to
abolish the death penalty,
get my life on track, and have the right,
and all issues pertaining to our basic and civil human rights.
In the pen, statewide, worldwide, and put down those knives.
Today we got Yolanda McNair, D. Martin, Patrick Lane, and most of all we do have Stephanie Babb. We'll be with you very shortly. Hang tight.
World Jam Global Radio. This is Clarity.
Now, just to kind of bring you up to date, I suppose the biggest thing actually taking place around the world right now is the coronavirus. And we had news even just today that 30 people were still trapped in a collapsed 5-star hotel in China that was being used as a quarantine area location for coronavirus victims. There were 70 people in there initially who were trapped in there. And we're now looking at about 30 people that are still trapped in there. Here in the UK alone, we are up to about 206 confirmed cases of the coronavirus, with a leap of over 42 just today. And now we're hearing worldwide that the increase, Italy, France, Iran, United States of America, Korea, so many countries now are reporting an increase in the coronavirus outbreak. But I just want to say one thing before we move on. I'm not going to prolong. I'm covered by the precious blood of Jesus Christ, and there ain't no coronavirus outbreaking on me, let me tell you, right? But more importantly, while we're being distracted by this outbreak of what appears to be a man-made disease that was fabricated in some sort of laboratory somewhere, or I don't care what anybody says, they say it comes from animals. Just don't get fooled by the distractions. While we're isolating ourselves and locking ourselves up in quarantine areas or at home, etc., there's something not quite right here. The world is up to something. The world leaders are up to something. And we need to make sure that we keep our eyes on the ball. Ebola was the last big outbreak that we had. And do you know anybody that's got Ebola now? No. And then in the 80s and 90s, it was AIDS and HIV. Well, even though that still stands out, that came from nowhere also. It was a huge distraction. You've only got to look to see what's going on in Afghanistan, Syria, the Middle East, out in Africa, and in places like that for you to be able to understand that there's a bigger picture taking place. So yes, please stay safe. By all means, wash your hands, use the correct hygiene, stay clean. Whatever you do, try and do your best to keep to stay out the clutches of this coronavirus. But don't be surprised when you find out, if we ever find out where it originates from, because there's something else going on here that the world doesn't want us to know. But today, that's it. That's all I'm going to say on the coronavirus. And unless there's any of my panel want to chip in with anything that they might want to add to the coronavirus. Any of you guys want to say anything on the coronavirus? You got any inputs? No, they're staying quiet at the moment. Okay. On that note, we do have Dee Martin, who is the sister of Andre Gladden. We have Patrick Lane, who is the uncle of Tyler Rock. We have Yolanda McNair, who is the mother of Adesha Miller. And we have Stephanie Ebab, sister of Captain Brian Babb. All family members of somebody who has been a victim of unlawful killing, police brutality, killed by cops in one way or another. And they're here with us. And today we're going to be talking about the no win, no gain, no victory in the case of Captain Brian Babb. But before we do that, we've just touched on the coronavirus. But I'm absolutely hell-bent on raising the awareness of the ignorance that is racism here in the UK. And I know that almost every case of police brutality, if not 95% of them, has a racial connotation to it. We thought that we had it under control here in the UK, but even our local sportsmen and our national and international sports players and athletes are now being targeted with racial abuse while they're in the throes of their chosen profession of sport. Nevertheless, us mere mortals who walk up and down this heavenly ground to and from work or just to the shop and back. But it's a disgusting, ignorant characteristic that I will not tolerate. And if you go up onto my wall, you will see that I have my racism not here, not in my name hashtags, and I'm posting daily as to something either positive or against the use of racist behavior and the ignorance of those who perpetrate that behavior. But I just wanted to have a frank conversation with some of my roundtable team members as to their view on the current standard or perception of racism in their localities. And let's just compare notes, shall we? Because we all live in different places, and we all see it from a different angle, even though some of us might see it for the same reason, because of the color of our skins. So let me just bring in my co-host and co-producer at the moment, as she stands in for TJ, Teresa Gallagher, and that is Yolanda McNeil. Let me bring in Yolanda first. So Yolanda, just some thoughts on how you see this racism thing manifesting itself, where you're at from your level.
I've experienced it on multiple levels, from the initial issue of the color of my skin and matching the intelligence of my mind, my ability to reproduce responsibly, to just my understanding of whatever the situation may be that I find myself in. Now, let's bear in mind that I've never been arrested. I've been pulled over for speeding. I've been pulled over because I appeared to be doing something suspicious. But of course, I always challenge those things. I've got officers off their kilter because they get upset at the fact that I challenge them. But nothing in the writings of our legal system says I got to bow down and kowtow to you. I've had to deal with situations where my son has been pulled over. My son was on a ticket for improper use of lights. He had his fog lights on at dusk. Even the judge, who happened to be a Caucasian, like the officer, had to say, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I have been to court because the officer claimed that I was following him too close. The judge was also Caucasian in that situation, as the officer was, and he threw it out. He said, who in the hell in their right mind is going to follow a cop close? I've had officers have an issue because my uniform is the exact same thing that they wear.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be harder for you, though, Yolanda, because you work in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then they want us to be their backup when things go down. Most recently, I've had, and I'm not going to lie and say it never happens, but I've had a positive interaction with police officers in the process of catching some people who are stealing. And they actually came back and checked on me the next few weeks that I was over at the location. And that was cool. Didn't have a problem with that. Everybody, treated me fair. Everybody spoke to me like they had sense. But that's not always the case. And unfortunately, it's more cops who got sense than it are that don't. It's just all the bad behavior has gotten a green light by that orange thing to go ahead and do whatever, and they feel entitled. And entitlement will get your ass whooped. People just don't understand that yet because it hasn't happened. And I'm an advocate of violence. I'm not telling anybody to go out there and fight with the cops, but damn it, don't take it. Because see, the moment you sit up there and allow them to talk to you wrong, the moment you sit up there and allow them to physically manhandle you, you're in trouble. So it doesn't make a difference whether you are or aren't resisting. But my mind state, the way I was raised, if you're going to be in a fight, let them know they were in a fight. You don't have to whoop their ass, just as long as they understand they were in a fight.
Here's the thing for us here in the UK. Sometimes I feel they tolerate us up until the point we mention the B word, or the R word, the racist thing or the black thing. The moment we mention the black thing and the racist thing, then it becomes a problem But as long as we're not complaining about it or moaning about it or talking about it or raising it or discussing it or putting it in their face and making them uncomfortable about it, it's almost as if we're acceptable, we're okay. They can tolerate us as long as we don't remind them of what they put us through, as long as we don't remind them of what they think about us, as long as we don't remind them of what they say about us, most of them behind our backs because they'll dare not say it to our faces. But as long as we don't mention it, it's almost as if we're okay and we can fit in with their crowd. But the moment they realize that we've got some article kind of mentality and we are not tolerating or standing for any of that, then we all automatically become a problem and they start to distance themselves from us. Well, I am saying not in my name. You are not delivering this racist behavior around me and expecting me to find it acceptable and say nothing about it. Not in my name. I will stand for it. I will stand against it. I will battle it. I will fight it. I will fight you down until you get it. Whew, that was some outburst. Okay, so let's just move on to D. Martin. How are you experiencing racism in your place?
Oh gosh, what a topic though, right? And I almost I'm completely agreeing with your exact statement. It's almost to where, you're being tolerated. And in fact, in my current career now, I am strictly the only African-American that works at this specific facility. So I do feel like there's certain conversations that I cannot have because of the workplace and my surroundings. So it's either you speak your truth and be true to you, or you make them uncomfortable and worry about them being uncomfortable. But the truth is uncomfortable. And so they over this time frame, they know D. So she will come out and say a couple things, and however you choose to respond, that is up to you, the direction that we're going to take this conversation. But I'm not going to continue to entertain a fool, because I'll just get upset, and then there's madness when there's supposed to be a message delivered. But I definitely feel like we're being tolerated as long as we don't do X, Y, and Z. Because, hey, none of the people that are alive, and this is the excuse that I've, heard time and time again, when an individual says to me, well, I have Black friends, but typically I don't associate with so-and-so. I said, well, you have Black friends, so does that mean, what exactly does that mean? Well, I like Black people, but you're cool. You're not one of them. Like, what is one of them? What are you saying? So I still have not gotten a sufficient answer for that. It's just like, and I've spoken to, I've had a conversation with a couple of my friends, and one of my close associates at work was that they had no idea that I was African American when I applied for this position based on the language. I can turn it on and turn it off. Whichever Donnie you get is just what you get based on what I get from you. But I said they had no idea I was Black until I came into the building, and they understood that this Black girl has undeniable skills, so we can't send her away. But had they known that, I wouldn't have had the opportunity. I wouldn't have never had the opportunity. So that's when we go into racism, having the ability to say, hey, we can pay you, but we can't pay you. You can get this health care, but you can't. That's the problem. And I think that our president also has allowed all of the racism. It's always been there. But the Band-Aid has been removed, and he has made it okay to be open about how you feel, regardless of how it makes that other person feel. He's induced the racism, he's induced the violence, making it okay, and he's even promoted it. So you get those people out there that are trying to go about life covering up this racism. Then you get someone in high authority and power and say, hey, it's okay to feel how you feel. It doesn't matter who you affect. Be free to be you. And then they are. And then that's when they come out and have all these comments about N-word this, black people this, white people this. And I'm just like, seriously? The only difference that I see between individuals is intelligent and stupid. Stupid people I can't deal with. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, literally. And they're on both sides, all sides.
Wow. I'm going to share two quick stories if I can. The first was in the 80s. I was working as a employment agency manager. So we ran an employment agency that provide agency staff to various warehouses in the City of London in particular. I was working near Liverpool Street, just down the road from London Bridge train station. And opposite the bridge from where my office was, there was a company called Hudson Bay, and they were furriers. You know what furriers are? They handle fur, animal fur for the fur markets that make fur coats and all that. So it's a real expensive business. But I'd never met the managers or the directors of Hudson Bay. We always communicated by phone, and when they talked to me on the phone, they hear a good, well-spoken individual. They never asked what color I was. And they were one of our biggest contractors. I supplied them, especially in the big season, up to 50 employment agency staff per day. So they were one of those what you'd call a big contract. One Christmas, and it was the only Christmas, the only Christmas they ever accepted an invitation to come and join us for a drink, because our office was above a pub right there on Queensbridge Road. Right, so they would come down, but every year we'd invite some of our contractors to come and have a drink with us for Christmas. Hudson Bay managers and directors never accepted the invitation, apart from this year. They came this year, and they were into the pub, and I was stood there at the bar waiting to buy the drinks, and we was waiting for almost. I didn't know who I was looking for, but they would know to come and find me. And Taffy, the guy who worked behind the bar, would have signposted them to me. So they've gone to the bar, they've gone to Taffy, and I'm standing at the bar. And the guy says, "We're looking for Kervin." He's the manager of, I can't even remember the name of the Abacus Employment Agency. That was the name of the employment agency I was working for. And Taff points to me, and I'm only like 3 feet away. 3 feet away in hearing distance. And the guy's response was, "But he's black."
Wow. Wow.
That was his
That's
response.
crazy.
But he's black. I turned around and I looked at him and I thought, really? I walked out of that pub. I went upstairs to my office. I was only a manager. I wasn't a director. I phoned my director, and my director told me to tell them to get out. And we weren't paying for their drinks. They never turned up for another Christmas, and 2 years after that they cancelled our contract. They went and found another employment agency. They didn't want to do business with us anymore because I was black. But yeah, racism is something that hurts, and I don't think that the people that perpetrate this hate realizes the effect that it has on people. I just want to bring in Patrick for 1 minute, and then I'm going to share another story. Patrick, your perception of racism from where you are.
In Kansas and in the U.S., racism is such a constant that you learn to deal with it almost subconsciously. You pick up on the cues. I remember when my daughter was 3 or 4, and I can't remember what happened, but I realized, we had never talked about race. We had never gone into that issue. I remember that there was some response that she made that let me know that she had realized that there were some differences within our society between white and black people. Just by the age of 3, she had picked up on enough social cues. In the 60s, there was a commission that was formed. It was called the Warren Commission. And this commission determined, after they did their studies, a pretty exhaustive study of America, that there were in fact 2 Americas. One was white and one was black. And these 2 Americas operated very differently. One seemed to have the side of the rule of law on their side. The other side was, everything was pretty much inverted between those two Americas. And that's the America that we live in. Is for my own experiences, I've always been a person. I realized early on that I fit every description personally, right? And so I've always been stopped a lot by police. Now, I've never broken any laws other than traffic, but I've had police at my car with guns drawn, 2 on the fender, 1 on the passenger side, while the one at my window is talking to me. Once they run my license and figure out that I'm nobody that they're interested in, they've always, not always, but most of the time, they seem a little put off that they haven't got a big fish or something. That's something that I've always dealt with. I've always spoken out against racism. I've always had white friends. And here's what I've realized, and I'll be short, is that a lot of white people don't realize that because they're treated a certain way in society, they will think that this is how everyone is treated. They don't have any point of reference that anyone would be treated differently. So when they're treated one way by police officers, it's been, up until recent times, it's been difficult for a lot of them to think that we're really treated any differently. Now, today, we have videos, countless videos and accounts of people of color being treated differently. So in America, it is something that is still very much in play in how we live our lives in America. And one more thing I'd like to say is that this schism between the races, it had the power to pull our country apart during the Civil War. It also has that power to pull our country apart, as we see now in the 21st century. And it's because America has not dealt with its race problem. It's often called racism, and the exploitation of the Native Americans are often called America's original sin. And it's a sin that America has been slow to own up to and fess up to. And it's a sin that America has been very reluctant to make any atonement for. And for that reason, that's the reason that we see the state of our country today. It's because we have been just so reluctant to admit our mistakes, to make up for those mistakes, and to try to do something. And for Black people, I think if we just saw the effort, I think that we're such giving people, and we're so American in our heart and soul. Our blood, sweat, and tears are into the soil just like anyone else's is, if not more so. And if we just saw an effort from people, I think that would do a world of good for the relations that we have in America. And now we're seeing, as Kervin said, we're seeing this type of racism and extreme nationalism pop up all over the world, and it's very concerning. Very.
Before I move on to Stephanie Babb, I'm just going to share another brief story. I was a victim of a direct racist attack back in the 90s. So I spoke about the 80s. Now I'm a journalist working for a local community newspaper called City Voice in Cardiff in South Wales. And I used to write a double-page middle spread. It was all about arts, music, and where to go and what's on and that kind of thing. I was a DJ in the community. I'd just set up my radio station up there, which was Dock of the Bay, the first black and multi-community community radio station in Wales ever. And it still exists, and it still stands today as a legacy of something that I've left behind, which I'm absolutely proud of. But I was working for City Voice. I was working in an office with 4 other white people. I'm the only black guy working in this office. And on this day, I get a letter. Which was from, and over here we have an organization. It's now outlawed as a terrorist group. They were called Combat 18, and they were the military wing of the political racist organization, the National Front. And they sent me a letter. And what they used to do when they sent mail was they used to send dog poo inside an envelope, just to really disrespect you, so that when you open it, you'd just be covered in dog poo. So it'd be dog poo, and all round the edges of the envelope was laced with razor blades. So if you tried to open it with your hands, you'd just slice your fingers open. Inside the envelope was a cutout of my picture, which had been taken from one of the local newspapers, because I was in the news quite a lot back then for stuff that I was doing in the community anyway. And they'd taken out a cutout of my picture, and on my face they had drawn several, childish, with a marker pen, scars on my face, sort of like insinuating that that's what they're going to do to me when they get hold of me. So they drawed and marked all of these scars across my face, on my forehead, on the side of my cheeks, etc., and marked them as scars, insinuating that that's what they would do to me when they encountered me. And I sat there, and I opened this mail, and I saw this stuff. So I avoided the dog poo. I managed to guide my way around the razor blade so they didn't affect me. And I pulled out this picture of me with the scars all over my face. Now my colleagues, who was in the office with me, I'd called them and said, look at this, and I was in real shock, disgust, anger, fury, all the above, and understandably so. And they came around my desk, and then they had a look at what it was that I was showing them. And then they all went back to their desk as if I'd just showed them a packet of candy sweets. It meant nothing to them. They all went back to their seats, they all went back to their desks, and carried on work as if nothing had just happened. And I sat there for a minute. I looked around my office, and I realized I actually didn't recognize the people that I was working with. I packed my stuff into a bag. I walked out of the office. I went home. Not one person called me to ask me if I was okay. The following morning, I contacted the director, and I told him I quit. I could not work in a place where the people that I worked with could not comprehend or understand that I'd just been subjected to a vile, racist, abusive attack. Not physical, but mentally and emotionally. And neither did they have any compassion for it. I couldn't work in that, so I quit. And I walked out, and I never went back. And, the funny thing is, this is 20 years later and whatever, I'll say this. I never, ever got a phone call from the directors or the managers or any of those colleagues ever asking me, was I okay? Or what was the reason for me leaving? Not one of them. And that's the kind of world that we're living in sometimes. Anyway, that's a story shared. That's the kind of racism that I was subjected to and more. But I just wanted to share that story with the people that were listening to understand why I felt the need to just talk about racism at the start of this show, because I feel it's such a significant part of police brutality and the unlawful killing that we're seeing taking place on such a high scale. To ignore the impact that racism has on that would be foolish and just as ignorant as those that perpetrate the racism in the first place. Let me just bring in Stephanie Babb now and ask her from her perspective, how does she see racism playing a part where she's at from her opinion? Come on in, Steph.
Good morning, Kervin. Good morning, you guys. So, actually, this is kind of topical. Regarding the trial, there were a lot of factors about race, but just to back up for a second, where I'm at in Eugene, Oregon, it's predominantly white, and our idea of diversity here are hippies. We're a college town, and I think that it gives people the impression that we are a lot more I say we as in a community in general, a lot more tolerant than we actually are, which that directly played into the jury selection as well. I'm going to do something right now, and this is I can do this because because I trust you guys and you're safe. So I want to do something. So when I talk about this was hard for my family, because we knew going into this, being a white family and getting to the point that we did, whereas we were doing something good and, just plugging away at the system, but there are so many other families of color, that don't get to this point. And there was a genuine sense of just, when we were waiting for the verdict to be read and they called us back into the courtroom, my brother's daughter, Kaylee, was in tears, and she wasn't worried about whether we were going to quote unquote win. She looked at me, and the only thing she said is, "I'm afraid if we win." And she paused, and I said, "Because there are so many other Black families and families of color that don't get here." And she said, "Yes." And I said, "That's okay, because then it's our responsibility to be the role models for other white families that we can give back, and that we're the ones that can open that door and start changing things. We're the ones. That's our job. So if we win, let's make it good. Let's do something with it. Let's advocate, push, help, do whatever we can for everybody else." Anyway, I was incredibly proud of her. I did. I grew up in a really racist family. And they would say, the racial slurs, some of them. And here's the thing that's weird is my brother, sister, and I, none of us agreed with it. I remember being shocked as a kid, and I grew up with it thinking, why would you say stuff like that? It didn't make sense to me, because it was so hurtful and hateful, and there's literally no reason for it. It never made sense to me. It still doesn't. So I think people just get into, I don't know. I mean, ignorance, stupidity. Like Dee said, I'm an equal opportunity discriminator. I hate all stupid people. And there's a difference between ignorance and stupidity at this point in time. In this age, let me tell
you where the difference between stupidity and ignorance lays right here in the UK. So just bear with me a second, and I'm quite sure you guys have got a similar story that you can tell from the United States of America. You see, here in England, there is no such thing as a true or real Englishman, because Englishmen were not the first on this land. This is Great Britain. Great Britain is a multicultural country, community, island, and their spouses are German, Dutch, Portuguese, you name it. They've come from every other country and island around the world. There was no such thing as a genuine, original Englishman. So you see all these white Englishmen who are shouting out, "This is England, get out." They don't actually belong here. In fact, the Welsh and the Scottish were here before them. And it was only when the Romans came, the Welsh and the Scottish were pulled up into the hills, and this great big central piece of land that the English now inhabitate became theirs. But it was only by name, not by birthright, because even the Queen's family is not English. So let's just get that right before we go any further. So I have as much right to call myself an Englishman, being born here, than any white man who calls himself an Englishman who was also just born here. Let me just make that point before we go any further. And I just want to thank you guys for sharing this little topic of racism, which I think we could actually go on and hold a whole show just on this topic alone. But this is not what today's show was meant to be about. I just really wanted to do an introduction into racism because I'm making a stand against it right here on my Facebook wall. And anybody that feels uncomfortable with my beliefs or my truths, leave. come off my Facebook page, defriend me, block me, but please don't come up in my face and try and tell me that you have some sort of justifiable reason or excuse for why you think racism still exists, because it doesn't. It shouldn't. It never has. Right. So that's me on my soapbox. I'm done. Let's move on to what the show really is about. And I want to thank you all for your contributions just on this topic of racism. And especially thank you very much for your honesty, Stephanie. That really means a great deal. And I believe all of your roundtable colleagues will appreciate what you've just shared with us just now. So yeah, we feel it. But we're here to talk about. Thank you. We're here to talk about your brother, Captain Brian Babb. A wrongful death lawsuit filed by the family of a military veteran shot and killed by Eugene police nearly 5 years ago, which was in 2015, is headed for trial. That was on Tuesday. I think it was the 17th of February. It went to trial, wasn't it?
18th, I think.
18th, okay. An 8-member jury will decide if Brian Babb, 49, was armed and aimed a rifle at a Eugene police officer before being fatally shot March the 30th, 2015. The lawsuit filed by Rhonda McGowan, a personal representative of the estate of Babb, as well as Babb's father, Lee Babb, ex-wife Stephanie Woodcock, and his children, Connor Babb, 20, and Kaylee Babb, 24, alleges unreasonable use of force, battery and wrongful death on the part of Eugene police officer Will Stutzman and the city of Eugene. The trial began at 9 a.m. on that day in courtroom 2 in U.S. District Court in downtown Eugene. Today we're going to be speaking to Stephanie Babb, Captain Brian Babb's sister, who was there, and she is now going to share with us what happened from 9 a.m. on Tuesday, the February the 17th or the 18th. It was definitely a Tuesday. So it was the 17th of February. Well, the trial started on the 18th, but this article was on the 17th. So go ahead, Stephanie. Welcome.
Gotcha.
Thank you very much for joining us. So before you go into what happened at the trial, just please, if you can, in 5 or 10 minutes, give us a summary of the case pertaining to the killing of your brother, Captain Brian Babb.
Okay, well, just to start, there are so many details and there's so much information that I actually want to share. I'm not even going to get close to it, so I'm going to do my best here. First of all, there's this one thing that I try to get to families, that evidence is everything. Without evidence, you don't have a trial, you don't get a case. And with police investigating themselves, they make that abundantly clear that they're not in any way going to help us. And part of our strategy was pointing out the fact that the gun was planted and presenting the forensic investigation, the evidence to prove that Brian was not holding a gun or pointing a gun at anyone, because that's been a huge bone of contention. That was what happened. Was just quick thing was my brother was on 130% disability for PTSD and TBI. He called. It was a Monday, March 30th, 2015. He called his VA therapist, telling her he was having a bad reaction. He was in a bad way. She called the police to do a well check. And the police came to check on him. And knowing he was a veteran, his therapist had said that he'd shot off a gun earlier, but it was shift change and misinformation got passed around. And so they went in, this veteran, they were worried. So they called in a SWAT team and surrounded his place put snipers on his neighbor's roof and surrounded the place with police, and brought in an armored vehicle called a Bearcat and posted around his house, which was on a panhandle lot behind other homes. And this is a guy that just called and was like, hey, I know my brain's screwed up and I need to do something. So I'm doing what I was taught to do, and that's called therapist. So the bottom line is 45 minutes later, surrounded the place with dead in his front door. Police and brought in an armored vehicle called a Bearcat. So at that point, posted around his house, which was the members of my family and I, you know, you go through all the shock and everything, but for some reason, for me to make sense of it personally, I needed information. And that was my primary goal, was information and evidence, whatever you want to call it. It was talking to the neighbors. It was going over things and then finding more and more mistakes that police, one, didn't have an answer to, and two, like leaving a bullet in the wall. They said that they thought the bullet had stopped in his head when, in fact, all you have to do is look at a picture. There's with the amount of blood that was there, there's no way that bullet was lodged. Anyway, really just basic, simple stuff. All the audio, visual equipment malfunctioning, minutes prior to him being shot, 2 minutes after, cops going into his house alone with no recording devices, knowing he had guns in there. And so on the newspaper, what came out was this picture of this huge black gun on his porch, because Will Stutzman, the man, the cop who shot him, had said that that's what they'd seen. But when you got to it, you listened to all the recordings that they did have, and they were all within visual range. I mean, they were within 50, 60 feet of each other or less, and that's how close it was. There were some very clear and distinctive, like, cop speak, but where when you got to it, you listened one to of them had said, one of the snipers on the roof had said, "What are we looking at?" And Will Stutzman, the man that shot, said, "A long black gun." Well, Brian's roommate had already came out and told them his safe was open, told them what was in the safe. And so they knew exactly what to do. And, you know, it's still, I don't know, the shock gets a little less every time I tell a story. It just, to me, it's amazing. To be that bold, that entitled, to feel like they could do something of this magnitude because they can is still just kind of blows me away. But let's get back to the trial here. We've been doing this for up to 5 years, and it has been about getting that evidence. Without that, and they get us because we're incapacitated. The shock of having a family member killed by police is so profound and affects so many people close to you and the community, and just already having that, well, what did he do wrong to get shot? Well, my brother was in his own home. He wasn't doing anything. If you want to get shot for having a bad day, by God, you better, it's not a good way to go. So that was the important thing. And that's where I think we lost the case, was based on that, because there was a strategic move at the end by the defense attorney where he pulled his expert witness, and therefore we had to take ours out as well. And that was the evidence. That was the proof. And the jury didn't get to hear that. And so it came down to the defense attorney in closing arguments. He was good. I'll be honest. He was damn good. Actually changed what the argument was, because this was about the Fourth Amendment. This is about our rights as individuals living in the United States of America. This is about our right to safety, our right not to be threatened, our right just to be. And he changed that. He switched it, and it was pretty impressive. But he was able to do that because he had taken the expert witness out. So what he did is he played on the emotions of this all-white jury, and with a courtroom full of cops, and told them, if you vote yes, you can give the kids maybe fifth of the suit was for like $7.5 million, but if you give them even $50,000 a piece and you vote yes, And he points over to the cop, Will Stutzman. And I'll be honest, he was kind of a sympathetic looking guy. I think he was coached, now that I think about it. But out of everybody, I actually felt bad for him. I did. And he said, this man, his life, his career, his world will be ruined. He will be known as a murderer. He will be the dirty cop. And then he kind of does this broad sweeping gesture with his arm. These would be dirty cops because they were all there, or something to that effect. So essentially, that was threatening. If I were on a jury and I'm looking at a room full of cops, and I know this because now having been out in public, it is intimidating. It is scary to be around police. They know who I am. And so to have a jury basically change the whole point of what we were discussing. We were arguing. We were trying to assert rights, and he made it into it was a federal case. He made it into a criminal one. And
I was gonna let you get all of the stats out, and that's what Yolanda wanted. But I think in order for us to really do this justice, there's some things that I want to try and throw in here. So before we lose it and we forget it and we don't come back to it. So you talked about an all-white jury, right? So do you think that the makeup of the jury had an effect on the outcome of the decision?
Absolutely.
And if the jury was more mixed, what do you think what difference would it have made in your opinion? Let's just share that.
And this comes right back down to, this was literally my first bullet point, and then you were talking about racism. So our attorneys are black. They're from Chicago, or two of them, and then we had Tim Volport from Portland, who's white, and then a white woman. And you go through, and it's civil, so it's or federal, so it's they go through like 400 people out of Oregon, and they kind of whittle it down, and they go over background checks. They look up these people, like 8 different ways of going into their backgrounds, and then they whittle it down to like 200, till they come down to a smaller pool, and then everybody has to decide. And like I said, and this is why I said it, that Eugene looks diverse from the outside. We look fairly liberal. However, there is an underlying current of racism and intolerance, and it's profound, and it really does exist. And so our jury was fairly young. I think that, our attorneys had brought up the fact, they're like, hey, we're 2 black men coming in from Chicago, and this is Eugene, Oregon. And so they wanted to be a little more conservative, and, they were brilliant. They were amazing. Carlton Odom has, the way he speaks is phenomenal, and it really captures you, just brings you in. And I think at the beginning, when we were going over the facts of what was happening, and it was very clear, I think that they really saw where we were coming from. And then there are so many factors that go into this incredibly short period of time, because we were looking at basically 8 days. I think that we were in court altogether, or 7. And it's so intense on a daily basis that every single thing you do, movements you make, things if somebody in the gallery talks too much or anything, all of that plays a part in what's going on. Say I cough when the defense attorney says something, they're going to hear that and wonder, is that inflection in their cough going to mean this or that? Is this person, there's so much that you have to be aware of. And so you're just on, you have to step in that courtroom and be on. And that's exactly. And then you're sitting in the courtroom and it's exhausting as well. But yeah, racism, I think it did play a part. I don't think that the jury in and of themselves, I don't think they looked at our attorneys and were like, oh, they're black, forget this. Not at all. I don't think it's like that. I think it's a deeper, more pervasive cultural kind of, just people can say they're not racist, but using certain language or the way they think, I think it's just growing up a certain way, unless you are actively arresting those kind of thoughts or being aware of the way it affects people around you. I think it was Dee that was saying, or somebody was saying, maybe it was Patrick, talking about, oh, somebody saying, this is my black friend, or this is, and making that differentiation. Well, why? Does it matter? Right? So, there's all that. So I don't think it was like conscious decision on their part. I think it was just the way everything culminated to the very end, which the defense attorney played on. And that's why I said he was really good at what he did. So as far as the facts or stats or whatever, you're going to have to ask me specifics, because I really haven't told and gone over the story a lot. I've just done the interviews afterward to the news stations, and so you'll have to keep me on track, Kerbin. And
I'll be doing my best. I'll be doing my best to keep you on track. But the bottom line is, the story is just so mind blowing that I can't help but try to, I mean, I've actually got people who are privately messaging me as we speak, who are just blown away listening to this story as we speak. But to hear,
so this isn't even part of it.
Yeah, but to hear a white woman say, right, that having an all-white jury worked against her and her family for an outcome on a verdict that should have been in your favor, shows you just how ignorant and incompetent the justice system is.
Absolutely.
Patrick
sorry.
No, Patrick Lane is asking, how long was the jury out?
Yeah. Well, there you go. I would love to just be able to tell everybody exactly point by point how it went down. But like I said, there's so much. And to answer that question is, they were out maybe an hour. So the judge tells them, reiterates, he gets down in front of the jury, which a lot of judges don't do. We had an amazing judge, McShane, and to reiterate what their job was. And that was to deliberate about the Fourth Amendment, whether that had been violated. Brian's Fourth Amendment rights had been violated. This was a wrongful death, excessive use of force case. And when you've got your rebuttal, we had come back, but before that, the closing argument from the defense attorney, he flipped the script. I mean, he made it into a criminal thing, criminal, like they were persecuting, rather than vindicating my brother, they would be persecuting this man that they've sat in courtroom with for the last week, watching him,
So what we're saying here is they shifted the sentiment, right? Instead of considering the impact that this death had on Brian's family, or the wrongful killing of an innocent, unarmed individual, which is wrong, they shifted the sentiment and wanted the jury to consider the impact a guilty verdict would have on an otherwise upstanding law enforcement officer with everything to lose.
1,000%. That's exactly what happened. And, building up to this, all my media appearances, everything that I represent to the public has been strategic getting up to this point. The way I represent myself, the words I use, it was all to build this, establishing who my family was in the community. I've been doing this for years. Before this, I couldn't care less. I really couldn't. But it was important that we were known and seen in a certain way, because that's what we wanted to represent. We wanted people to be familiar with us and have that sense of history with the family. That's why I was always out there. And, that's why I always responded to any questions, and, representing a united front, regardless of the fractions that were actually happening in our family. And that was so important.
I just want to go back to. Can I just go back to the jury 1 second? I want to bring Patrick in a minute. I just want to talk about had there been a better mix of diversity on the jury, Patrick. What do you think the outcome would have or could have been, and why?
Just listening to Stephanie and being familiar with small town justice, before a jury, I would say that Brian probably didn't have a lot of footing in such a scenario. I'm sorry, I have an ear infection, but what's important, I think, and it kind of segues back to what we were talking about race before, is that regardless of who you are, if you find yourself on the wrong end of police abuse, you basically, regardless of what color you are, you're going to get the same level of justice, which is none. Yeah. You're going to be regarded as if you were an other. And I think Stephanie said something in the intro that I think is vital when she said about her family, about her niece who was asking her, concerned about if they won the case. This is a problem for white people. It's a problem for Black people and people of color, of course. But it's not a problem that we can solve, because it's not a problem that we created. So what's needed are these conversations between white people. We need voices like Stephanie's. Myself, I try to speak up for groups that are not my own group, right? Because I think that's powerful when someone who is unaffected by an issue has the courage to stand up and say this is wrong. So I've always taken the position that this issue of race is one that white people need to take the lead on. With Brian's case in particular, I think certainly racial diversity or diversity within the jury could have been beneficial. But it sounds like I just see that whole, as she's describing that scenario to me, I can feel the intimidation that must have existed within that courtroom for not just Stephanie's family, but for everyone that was involved in that case. So those are my thoughts on it.
Okay, listen, I'm just going to come in there and back that up, because I'm going to tell you where I've never been to an American jury or trial or anything like this. But this is my perception of what I think the difference could have been. I believe that if you had a more diverse jury, they wouldn't have fallen for the hogwash of the perception of this law enforcement officer's life being turned upside down and going into turmoil because he was now going to be victimized as a murderer for killing an unarmed individual. I think if you'd had a more diverse jury, they would have seen a lot more of what was for what it was, and that Brian Babb, an innocent, unarmed individual, was murdered on his doorstep. Irrespective of whether this guy has got to face consequences, he's got to face consequence, because Brian Babb's already had his. He's dead. He ain't getting up from that. There's no coming back for Brian Babb. But this guy has done a wrong. Right, he's shot and killed an innocent, unarmed individual, somebody who was going through a mental health crisis, who had his caseworker on the phone trying to calm him down in the middle of his breakdown, and they choose to rock up with a SWAT team and murder him with a bullet through his chest, and then claim that it was justifiable homicide. I think if you had a more diverse jury, they would have wanted to see into those facts a little bit more. One of the questions that was asked by Patrick also earlier on, and we haven't yet asked, is because we know that we've gone into this case in great detail on several occasions on this show. And we want to talk about this planted gun, the gun that they planted down by Brian in order for them to suggest that he was armed. Let's talk about that, and how were they able to explain this gun that shouldn't have been there?
Well, here's the thing is they didn't expect me in particular to take such a proactive stance. And because did all the training, for the DA's Victims and Witness Advocacy training back in the 90s, I had some knowledge of how things work. So like I said, for me to make sense of this, I needed answers. So I kept calling the DA's office. I'd call the chief of police, and to their credit, they responded to me personally, would talk to me. The problem is they thought that if they had placated me enough, I would go away. And it did just the opposite, because what they were saying wasn't giving me the answers, because they were talking around it. And it's like, this is a good example. My son was in there, and I've said this from day one, but it was like, if you've ever seen the movie Chicago, the play Chicago, and the attorney's like tap dancing around like soft shoe. It's like that. It's like trying to get an answer, specific answer. So having said that, when I called the DA about whether it was justified or not, an assistant said they were releasing the information on the news later that day. Well, I just about lost it. And I said, no, you tell the family first. We have that right. We are going to take that right. So we set up, because we weren't all united at that time, we set up 3 different meetings with the DA. He had to hold off releasing the information publicly until he'd met with all of us. So we go into the first meeting, my mom and I, with the DA, and I record it. And I tell him, my mom is hard of hearing. She'll want to hear this. This is important. And, it's her and I in this tiny room with 4 cops and the DA. And, it's a little, they want to intimidate you. That's the point. They want to shut you down. So I recorded it, and I asked all the pertinent questions. Why would you do this kind of thing? And I know we're going to get to the gun here in a second. And he came back to the point that Brian was a veteran and they knew he had guns. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's a huge part of our population in America today. So how does that play into it? And the thing about the gun, how, just asking him these things. So I have him on recording. I'd ask him, how would the gun fall that far away from my brother? He was shot in the spine. It severed his spinal cord. So you drop, you don't fall forward. There's no reaction where you shove the gun away from you or anything else. And it was fairly far away from him and laid out. And they said we had to place it there to get an evidence photo. I was like, you did what? You placed the gun there for the evidence photo. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for telling me that, because that's just one more step on that road of you guys screwed up big time. And they just thought that if, like I said, it's their job. Their job is to make me feel like I'm okay, you're safe, and then carry on, move on, get away from us, leave us alone, let us do our thing, because we can't. They can't. Qualified immunity. It's always going to come back to that, by the way. So the gun, that's how it got there. There was a man that went in the back, a cop, and I have proof that he's lied on the stand and has planned evidence and has been convicted of excessive use of force. The guy's not a good guy at all. Had gone into the back of Brian's house. And that's when we believe all this happened. And then the cops just hide, lie for each other, or more, they just don't offer information. Like they don't remember anything. 1,000 pages of depositions from how many cops that were there that day. And most of them don't, quote unquote, don't remember how something went down. And it's like, wow, that's demeaning. That diminishes so much. But anyway, that's.
Is that how they explained that gun? Is by they didn't remember how it got there, Stephanie?
No, they said they placed it there. So they went by Will Stutzman's words, and this goes into, like I said, the nonverbal communication they were having, and that kind of thing. Because there was a lot of confusion when Will Stutzman shot. He wasn't sure if he had been the one who shot Brian. Now, from what it looks like to me, and what my dad coined, it's called buck fever, and what happens is if you're hunting deer and you have a buck in your sights, in your gun sights, you get a rush of adrenaline. And instead of being mindful and taking a breath and taking the shot, you react and you shoot immediately. And I believe that that's exactly what happened with Will Stutzman, because from the vantage point of the snipers, Brian already had, when he came to the door again to tell them to get off his property, and I did not know this until we were in court, but he had been talking to a negotiator, and he said, "I'm not a criminal." And he had he'd been on the phone. He had an appointment for the next day.
I think, Steph, I think it's very important that we just go over a certain sector of this to give the audience, especially those that have not heard this case before. I really think that it's important that we really try to understand what they were all doing there in the first place. Now, bearing in mind that Brian had called his caseworker, he'd said that he'd fired the gun into the ground because he wanted to see what it sounded like or hear what it sounded like. She believed that he was having a bit of a crisis, a bit of a breakdown. So she called 911 for support. Now, have you ever had an opportunity to speak with her directly?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, Can we try and understand what she thought was going to take place when she made that call? What was she looking? What was the outcome? What sort of support was she looking for Brian? What sort of help was she trying to get for him? Where did she think she was? And what did she think she was going to be able to assist them in being able to do in order to calm Brian down or to get him to a place where it was now safe?
Well, she even testified. And right after this happened, she wrote out a huge op-ed for the local newspaper, and they printed it. And this has devastated her life. She made that phone call with the understanding that Brian would be checked on. And by point of fact, we don't know when the gun was shot.
And was that because she was away at a distance?
That was her day off.
Right.
And
so
she just happened.
She couldn't get there as quickly as she would have liked to. No,
they told her not to come.
Right.
She offered to go over there because as it escalated so quickly, she's still on the phone. There's a shift change with 911 operators, and it went from her concern. She was trying to get across that it was her concern he had shot off a gun. Now, just recently, they published some proof that PTSD has a lot of association with noise, and that's exactly what Brian had said. He goes, "I just had to hear it." Yeah. And it's part of that. There was no intention to hurt or do anything to anybody, and he actually shot it into the floor. Nobody was home. She'd said, "Hey, why don't you go put that in your car? Go lock it up." And that's where it was. That's where it was found. He'd gone out, put it in his truck, locked it up.
So if the gun that he fired into the floor, that the caseworker asked him to unload and go and put it away in his car, was found in his car, what gun was found on the floor?
It was a black rifle. I don't know. I forget what it is. Maybe it was a 30-06. I'm not sure, but it looked very menacing. It's got a bipod on it. It's meant for hunting. And like I said, his roommate had already come out and had informed the SWAT team, as they're all kind of milling around, quote unquote, in danger, that Brian had his guns in there. You know, he's a veteran. He was a sharpshooter. And so that kind of became their excuse, and they also used it in their defense. And so that information got misconstrued, and it came out that one person said he'd shot out a bedroom window, like he was shooting guns, that kind of thing. And that was very, very far from the case. But as far as Becky Higgins go, they actually told her to hang up. She did not want, she's like, I can go over there. You know, she's very distressed. You can hear it in her voice on the 911 call. And she testified just in the trial that, you know, Brian was joking. I've listened to all the calls. Can we
just pause 1 second? You see the gun that was laid down by the side of Brian. Has they offered any evidence to suggest two things? One, was that the gun that Brian fired? And B, was there any evidence that that gun was fired at all?
No, that gun was unloaded. There was nothing. He never fired that gun. Apparently,
so if he never fired the gun, and that gun had not been fired, used at all, then doesn't their argument for fear of their life and the life of others, because he was apparently firing out of the window, does that not blow that argument out of the water anyway, and make that a non-entity? How are they able to submit into evidence that Brian was threatening by firing out of windows if the very gun that they've placed alongside him has no evidence of being fired at all?
Okay, well, so that was a huge, huge part of the trial. All right. And that's where the defense attorney in his closing arguments turned it back around on us, the family, sitting there, and put the blame on us for getting fingerprints, because that was part of our thing. Was there were no fingerprints taken. There were, you know, so who could have touched the gun? You're not supposed to touch evidence before you take pictures of it or anything else. And so no DNA evidence. So we couldn't see if, you know, another cop had done anything, any of it. And so I'm gonna get off track here for a second. I'm kind of forget where I was at, but step in, Kervin. I'm.
You got to come in quickly, Patrick.
Just ask me again what it was.
Yeah, I find it.
Go on, Patrick.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I find it remarkable that the gun, they went and they fished a gun out of the house that had not been used, that had not been fired, and that was unloaded. Put it in a photograph of the crime scene. This seems so. You would, if you saw this on a TV courtroom show, you would immediately say, okay, there's no way they can get away with that, but they're getting away with it. You know, I think that's amazing. One of the many amazing parts of this, he answers the door. Now, this is a vet, no less. This is a vet. We've been at war for over 20 years. This is someone who has served the country. He recognizes he's having a mental health crisis, calls his provider, right? And the police show up and they kill him in the front door of his house. And then they go into his house and find a gun that had not been used and was unloaded and puts it in a crime scene photo. This just seems, it makes me sick. This case.
All they have to have is probable cause, though.
Yeah, that's all. You can't even make this stuff up.
Qualified immunity. All that cop had to say was he feared. He had fear. Now, mind you, this man was standing inside a Bearcat on a stool, so he stood up outside of the turret. There's a 2.5 foot, 3-inch thick steel turret lid. He was taking cover behind. My brother had already come to the door countless times and told him to get the F off his property. And I'm not a criminal, that kind of thing. And all this man would have had to do was he had to lean out away from it, around it, to get a clear sight at my brother from maybe 60, 65 feet away.
And bearing in mind,
but here's the thing, y'all. Here's the thing. As long as there's a reasonable impression that there's danger,
right,
that he has the ability to cause harm, that's all they need. You know, the fact that he didn't have a weapon in his hand. Well, we know that he has weapons in the house. Okay, so that makes the nothing in his hand irrelevant. The fact that he keeps going back and forth to the door makes him non-compliant. The fact that he is agitated because y'all are there means that he is doing something unlawful. See, these are the way that they turn things on the victims so that the officers become victimless in the crimes that they commit.
That's right. That's exactly right, Yolanda. So in the closing arguments, when the defense attorney turns this whole thing around and he'd taken off his expert witness so we couldn't have ours with the actual factual forensic evidence that he couldn't have been holding a gun at that point in time. And you have the two snipers who claim they couldn't see. They couldn't see. We proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that indeed they could see. And the only one that apparently saw Brian with a gun was Will Stutzman, the man who shot him. Okay, so they're looking at this real quick cover up. They need to make this just look legit somehow, some way. They already know he has guns in the house. You know, it'd been said. So they rushed him. And that was the Fourth Amendment part.
So 1 second. So Julie makes this point, right? Because one of the things that you were saying was the officer, the sniper who took Brian out, was protected behind a military guard, right? Bulletproof.
Correct.
So therefore, he had no qualified immunity to support him because he could not have been in fear of his life because his life was protected by a bulletproof guard.
Okay. I'm going to throw you guys on your butts a little bit right here. So the guy who went into the back, the cop that went into the back of his house, I believe planted the gun in the first place. I think Will Stutzman was kind of, I don't know, the patsy, if you want to call it that. And it was the sniper, Overwatch is what they call him, on Brian's neighbor's roof, Joe Kidd, and the cop in the back, Judd Warden, that kind of mastered this. And they have history of doing this kind of thing. And I'm going to, this is hard. I guess this is what it is. This is why I keep kind of like, I get on a subject and I'm talking and I kind of space out because this is stressful for me. Going back over this, and I've got all these, things I want to tell you, and then it disappears. And it's got to be like a PTSD thing or something. And it just is crazy. But what they're saying, Yolanda was saying in the threats and what Julie said. And so they were saying that he was a threat to his neighbors, and they had ushered the neighbors, or like, you guys go back to your houses, stay inside, that kind of thing. Well, the neighbors knew my brother. And so they took pictures. We got pictures and statements from the neighbors of what they saw, which was vastly different from what the cops put in their report in the IDFIT, the Internal Deadly Force Investigative Team report.
And that's what is even more puzzling, because the only group that has the most negative reports of what was taking place that day are the law enforcement who are trying to protect their own interest. Yet those that would supposedly have been in harm's way are declaring a totally different picture. Now, if they were in harm's way, you'd have expected him to say, well, I was a little bit frightened. He was acting a little bit crazy. Maybe they shouldn't have shot him because we know him pretty well, but it is a little bit... You'd have expected something to support the police report.
So, well, you'd expect him to be... You wouldn't expect him to do this in the first place, but they did. They do. That's what they do. It's power over, get in there, control the situation. There's no negotiation. There's no... reading the situation. There's no attempt at making it okay. So Will Stutzman, the cop that shot Brian, one standing in the Bearcat, actually specifically asked for Judd Warden, the guy who went for his assistance, to go, and he went into the back of the house. This same man who had ushered, we heard the recording, and it was shocking. It was shocking. And so the defense attorney in its closing arguments had to kind of turn it around so people weren't thinking about what this cop had said. And what had happened is, on a recording, you could hear him talking to the neighbors, and he's saying, "Get your kids away. You guys go back." He doesn't even sound that concerned. Nobody was that concerned. They're all milling around like, what's going on with Brian? And as this guy's walking back towards my brother's house, he says, and I'm going to use the F word because I want you to hear. If you want to bleep it out, I won't, but I won't use it. Then it'll make it hard. Okay.
There's no bleeping here. Let's just go for it.
Okay. Thank you. He said, "Fucking white trailer trash," under his breath. And it was recorded, and we heard that. And mind you, during this whole trial, and part of the, yeah.
Wow.
So in the closing arguments, the defense attorney brings up this random, arbitrary what-if story about Brian having a rifle, shooting at a 3-year-old little girl, a neighbor. Like, he's trying to make it like Brian was the threat, because the jury had already heard the cop calling the neighbors effing white trailer trash under his breath. And so he had to turn that around, and he made up this weird story that had nothing to do with anything and just threw it in there at the end. Honestly, if you guys ever watched Matlock in the 80s or anything.
Yeah. I used to watch Matlock.
He Matlocked the shit out of this thing. I'm telling you. And at the very end, his closing arguments, he trumped it because he didn't rely on fact. He relied on people's fears, and he nailed it. I'll give it to him, man. He won.
Okay.
He nailed it.
Let's hold fire for a second. We've got 28 minutes left before this show's finished. I just want to bring Dee Martin in a second because she's been patiently waiting in the wings, and I'm hoping that she's still there. I can see her mic muted. She needs to unmute it so I know that she's alive, breathing, and still part of the team waiting to come in. But there is so many similarities between what happened with Brian and what happened with Andre, that the response by law enforcement slightly different, because for me I think it's even worse in your case, only because the case worker was on the phone to Brian.
Yeah.
The caseworker was counseling him and talking him down and had the situation under control. But she wasn't there. What she wanted was 911 support, a welfare check to make sure that he had complied with the request that she had made, which was to unload the gun, put it in a safe place, and for them to just make sure that he was okay. And they've arrived with a SWAT team, escalated the situation quite drastically and quickly, and in no time whatsoever, we're talking about a situation that was being managed into the death of a troubled young man suffering with PTSD who had served his country 2 terms in Afghanistan at the very least.
Yeah, so if you want to talk about losing careers, so closing arguments, defense attorney points to Will Stutzman and says, this man here, and he was a very, very sympathetic witness. I mean, he testified and he had to have been coached, but I actually, like I said, I felt bad for him and that he would be a murderer and all these things. Becky Higgins lost all of her clients. She doesn't practice anymore. They were scared to talk to her. She was so traumatized by the situation and what had happened and still is. her testimony, you know, in these situations, you get angry at a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, and whether it's justified or not, it just is. And as long as you're aware, like I've been about that. So there have been times that I've been like, Becky, what the hell? You know, how could you do this? But it really wasn't her fault. It's not, you know, but it was easy to make her the scapegoat. And so her testifying and saying that, and she really liked Brian. She trusted Brian. She'd known he'd put his gun away. She knew this just went down the rabbit hole immediately. And, you know, her being shut down, they literally basically hung the phone up on her because she was crying by that time saying, I need to go over there. Let me just talk to him. And they said, no, you need to hang up now. And she knew at that point. So this woman's life has been inexplicably altered on a level she doesn't practice anymore, you know. So, and you're talking about Will Stutzman. I think he's gotten a promotion in the last 4 years, you know, and he's sitting there with half the courtroom filled with
but that's what they asked for. They asked for everybody to consider how this would affect him, how this would change his life, how this would mess up his career, how this would, you know.
Oh, they didn't ask. He just told him. He said, if you vote yes, and he walks over to him and he said, does this guy look like a murderer? And he's standing next to Will, and Will's looking pathetic. And he's like, you're calling him a dirty cop. He will live with that and his children for the rest of his life. And my thought was, he has a life to live.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Brian's life had come to a very sad end.
That's right.
Brian had no life to live, and his,
that's right.
And his family, all they had left was his memories. And now you want to tarnish those memories by making out that he was some crazy madman about to go on the warpath.
And that's exactly what he did. And I'd even told our attorneys, I texted him this long thing of like, because you're negotiating the feel of the courtroom and where it's going, and as much as it's based on facts, it's based on swaying opinion. It's playing on people's emotions in a very regimented way in the courtroom. And so there's so many factors that you have to consider. And so at one point, you know, you could feel kind of the energy shift of the jury, and just where it was going and the arguments and that kind of thing. And I said, I think, you know, because I couldn't figure out the defense attorney. Eugene had issued a reputable law firm and got rid of them and hired Bob Franz, this attorney that, you know, I couldn't understand why they would choose kind of this bumbling guy. I mean, he's got, you know, he's good at his job, but I mean, he's nothing special. But then I found out real quick, because he had threatened the witnesses, and that came out in the pretrial hearing. And they chose him because he was dirty and he was willing to go to any length to protect the cops. And so they're just one on top of the other. And that's what he did.
So here's the thing, Steph. Going into the trial prior to the 18th of February, what was you and the family's thoughts? Were you feeling confident? Did you think you were in with a shout?
I'll tell you something. It's a big hurry up and wait. When we were looking at getting attorneys in the first place, you know, my dad said it's going to be 4 or 5 years. I was thinking maybe 2. And at that point, it was a mindset. And this mantra that I played the long game. It's not going to matter how long it takes. So all this builds up to this trial, you know, 5 years this month that we've been working, that I've focused my life on this. It has been, besides my kids, this has been my priority. And it gets condensed into a week, and you're around all your family. in a very highly emotional subject, you know.
Well, you're having to relive this thing all over again.
Right. And from the outside, you know, the public see this and it's condensed into this one situation, this do or die, win or lose. But that's not what this is about. And it can't be, because you'll make yourself crazy if it is. And what this is this is about a process and how long it took for our family even to get to that point. The countless summary judgments, the, you know, different judges at any point in time, a judge could say, yeah, I don't think so. This doesn't feel right to me, or whatever reason. He could have said no. And so to get to that point, to me, was a win. And if you go into it with that, then you're going to be okay. And so my niece on the last day, she's just an artist. She's got an artist's soul, and her fragility is her strength. But she was so close to Brian, her dad, and she was inconsolable and weeping because we just spent a week listening to the tapes of my brother being shot over and over and over again. And every day you walk out of that courtroom and you have to prepare yourself for the next day. Get up. What are you going to wear? You're going to have to go through a metal detector. You're going to have to, you know, do these things and show up every day to hear this again and again and again. And that's exactly what the defense attorney did. But when she was at that point, I just asked her, what's the worst that could happen? Because that already did. Brian isn't coming back. Yeah. Your dad can't be in, you said it, Pervin, he can't be deader. That's the worst. We made it through that. If we could make it through that, who cares? I mean, yeah, would it be great if we won? Hell yes. But you know what? That verdict is not going to change who we are and what we do. We are the same right now as we were before we walked into that courtroom. Except for we have 5 years of our family working together for the right thing, helping other families, being that voice, and vindicating that memory of my brother. And that's been my job, to make sure that people knew who he was and not what happened to him. And we did that. And so if we walk out and the verdict was that we lost, how do you qualify that, really? Because honestly, we lost a long time ago. We lost when Will Stutzman pulled the trigger.
Okay. You just hold fire there. Compose yourself. We're going to bring Dee Martin back in. We've been trying to get her in for a while. She's had a problem getting in, technical difficulties, but she's here now. And we were talking about the mental health related connection between Brian and Andre. And in particular, it was even worse for Brian, in my opinion, only because he was actually online to his counselor, his caseworker, who was calming him and talking him down while he was in the middle of this crisis. But do you see the replications, the parallels in the way that both Brian and Andre was handled by law enforcement officers while they were both in the middle of mental health related crises?
I need to jump in really quick. Sorry, Dee. It'll be really quick. I just want to point out that I had contacted Dee when I heard about this story because Andre did what Brian did. Andre was getting help. He went and did what he was supposed to do to get help. And he was turned away like Brian was. I just need to point that out. So he did do everything he was supposed to, and he's still in that situation.
Yeah. So Andre's, I think Andre's, the other individual's response to Andre's going through his mental crisis, either at the hospital or the person's home that he knocked, the door that he knocked on. Those responses were typical for being a responder to an individual in that situation asking for help. But the failure mainly came from the lack of investigating what the actual issue really was to get him the attention that he needed. And that was from law enforcement initially. So most often I find that other individuals outside of law enforcement can respond with more compassion or authority and investigation to see what's going on with the person, and that's just out of common sense. But at law enforcement, I do not believe, based on what I see day in and day out, their initial response to someone going through a mental crisis, their ability to do so is almost 0 to none. Even if we would even take the mental aspect out of it, them escalating these issues from an average person standpoint, on top of the fact that this person has a mental issue, there's very much that they have learned to do, are trained to do, and are willing to do. It seems like to me that it's more work for them to either try to learn these techniques so that they can deal with people going through mental illnesses. But again, I don't think it's a huge interest for law enforcement to understand the dynamic and what they need to do to better assist people that have ongoing mental crisis.
So I'm going to ask this question to any of you, and all of you can answer in turn if you like. And this may well be the last question that we get the chance to really fully investigate. Although I'd like to round it up towards the end if we have a bit of time. But let's just say, for example, at the end of both Andre's and Brian's death, if law enforcement in their investigation were to have found they may not have acted unlawfully, but acted incorrectly by misunderstanding the type of person and environment that they had stepped into, and had they had better training that equipped them to manage people with mental health related issues, they could have possibly handled this differently. And had they taken responsibility and said, right, okay, we're not going to prosecute any of our officers because they weren't to know no better. We don't actually have the training for this, and this is how we would normally react if we were faced with this situation. But we need to look at how we interact or engage or respond to issues where people are having mental health breakdowns. And this is a learning curve for us, right? If they had come out with these type of statements, would that have been better and easier for either of you, Stephanie, Dee?
I think they did to a certain degree. They never say they're sorry. They never say we could have done this differently or anything. Or maybe they didn't say any of that. I know that. Well, I won't speak for Dee, but they do say, and they'll just tell you what you want to hear. That's what I think. I don't think it means really a lot.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and so
there's definitely an initial apology issued on the behalf of the incompetence of the officers they allowed to patrol our street. They provide excuses, and when there is valid information that yes, indeed, we failed, there's excuse after excuse, and turns the victim into the suspect that, well, it's his fault. He did this, he did that. So no initial apologies ever issued.
Now, I want to point out that one reason I've been able to have the momentum and the energy to even do this is Brian was killed on a Monday evening, and by Wednesday, it was the next following Wednesday, I held we had his memorial, been on, all that stuff, and we held a press conference outside of his house. And by that time, a week and a half later, I'd come up with Brian's bill. And that was after my mom and I talking about it. And because we kept going, I kept saying there had to be some policy, some procedure, something needed to be changed, something they were so confused in my brother's case, they didn't know what to do. And my stepdad's a veteran. So between my mom and I, we came up with Brian's bill, which is a task force. And I did originally got for the VA, but for veterans in a mental health crisis that are called with their own 3-digit crisis number hotline like 911 to respond to individuals in distress in an emotional health crisis. And the problem with what we have around like Cahoots or Portland's Project Response is, one, they don't get the message because you go through the call center of 911. I wanted there to be a separate call center and a separate task force. And these things are kind of simple. They've done this before, like the domestic violence task force they created that because in the 80s, more cops were killed by domestic violence calls than all others combined. So they came up with this task force specifically to deal with that situation. And so based on that and some other information, I'd come up with Brian's bill. So we'd worked on it, and I'd worked with, Senator Wyden's office and everything else. And, I shelved it, but the week of the trial, Wyden released an initiative for a 3-digit crisis hotline with its specialized task force. Basically, it was the bill verbatim that I'd written, but it's out there. Hopefully it will go through. That means if somebody's in emotional health crisis, you can dial 988 and you get a group of people who are specifically trained to respond to that situation. The problem with the groups we have now are they're not allowed, not only because they don't get the call, but because if there's any belief there's a weapon involved, they're not allowed to approach that individual. So I had taken that problem, I'd solved that problem by inserting a veteran, a retired veteran that can, they're like law enforcement, whatever, they can be there. And I also thought a veteran can talk to another veteran, like Alcoholics Anonymous, it takes one to know one. So who better to talk to somebody? And so hopefully that will go through, and I'm hoping that'll change. I'm hoping that will change for a lot of people. And then that's a number they can call and rely on instead of bringing a SWAT team in to a mental health crisis situation and negotiating it with the end result of that person staying alive, being alive.
Well, that's absolutely great news just on that particular front, that there is now some sort of a response unit with a 3-digit number where people can call if they were to encounter somebody in a mental health crisis who are more trained and equipped to support that individual and probably make a better call in order to support them. I just want to bring in Yolanda very quickly, who's been I don't know, there's a bit of noise going on in her background. I don't know if we need to beat her next, but I was just wondering, how much difference would this 988 number make, do you think, to law enforcement and the way that they now react and respond to calls where people are going through a mental health crisis?
I do apologize for the background noise. I got to go pick my daughter up from work. But it would make a great difference, especially if you have trained officers who are able to discern the level of intervention that's needed based on the conversation. Because you can tell when a person is highly agitated or when they're in a state of being where, it can start to go downhill. Because cops, let's just be honest, they come in there on 100, no matter what the situation is.
Yep.
It's very rare that you get an officer that has enough control and seasoning to actually have a conversation with a person first to see where they're at. They do have it in Memphis, Tennessee now.
That's right. That's what I was going to say.
They actually have officers trained Right. And they go in there and they have a conversation with the person first. And that's 9 times out of 10, all that person wants is somebody to talk to, somebody to listen to them.
Familiar with them, yeah. And the cops that do that volunteer for that position. There's 8 positions there in Memphis. And they get 40 hours extra training for crisis management. And they're the ones who do a lot of people with the mental illness are repeat offenders. I put quotations in that. But so they get familiar with these individuals. Here's the problem and why we don't use or utilize that particular model. It's because we lose revenue, because there are not as many arrests being made. The statistics from Memphis are phenomenal. How many less arrests they've made? Thousands less. That's a loss of revenue. So yeah, you know what? When you have cops going for quotas that have to meet quotas, that doesn't work. The two are not mutually exclusive. We need to think, do we need this for the community or do we need to make money? I don't know, man. It's pretty simple to me, but
it makes sense all around. I've often said that here in the UK we have an organisation called Crisis, and Crisis are the first responders where it comes to dealing with people with mental health. And this is the police call as well. So you call. I can't even remember what the number is now, 101 or whatever it is that you call here. It used to be 999. I don't call police anymore. I deal with things myself, so I don't call police. But if you call the police and the issue is related to mental health, crises are actually sent in, and police are sent in to support them, or they wait outside. Only if there is a firearm involved are the armed response units called in to support. But if there's no armed person in there, then it's just ordinary officers or detectives that are supporting the crime. But the crisis team get the first shout. And yes, we fully understand that if somebody is geared up, loaded, with a firearm loaded, and their level of crisis is uncontrollable, and they're hell-bent on chaos and destruction, as we've had with terrorists and the like. I suppose we can all understand if somebody is running down the street shooting at random individuals, that an officer is going to have to take them down. We get that. But Andre Gladden, Brian Babb, and so many others did not have to die. And that is the sad indictment that we're living with now, is that there are individuals whose families are grieving when they really didn't need to be. These are not individuals that were likely to cause harm, were about to cause harm, or had even completed some sort of destructive rampage, leaving chaos in their wake. And the level of disrespect and the lack of dignity that was shown in the way that they were cut down so early in their lives leaves a very bad taste in the mouth, and so many questions unanswered. It's probably about... Go on, Steph.
Sorry, there are so many things I want to say. I do want to put this out there because it's a change in my stance, and that I've been wanting to say since the trial. I already knew I was going to do this, but I want to get specific, and instead of vilifying police altogether, I want to notice the ones that do the right thing. Last night, a completely random encounter I had with this guy, and I don't know how it started. The question: he's a sheriff's deputy, and he was talking to a friend about turning his department in a place here in Oregon, turning his department in for corruption and fraud. And I immediately broke into that conversation. Wow. And so those people, and that's why I took the time and I talked to him and I said, you have support. I'm not going to say just because they took this job, they're bad people, but they choose to be on that side of the person that's made really bad decisions. and when they choose to lie or cover up or anything else. But I want to empower the people who want to do the right thing to do the right thing, like this guy I met last night, because that's what's going to happen. We need to get that division in there. We've got to break that thin blue line, man.
Thank you very much. Listen, guys, we have actually run out of time. We've now gone over our 2 hours. I'll have the management pulling the plug on me very shortly. I want to thank Stephanie Babb, Yolanda McNair, Patrick Lane, and Dee Martin for an absolutely incredible 2 hours on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. And we'll be back next week with another explosive interview. It's all I've got time for. I'm out of here.